Welcome to Revenge with Peter Stories from my grandpa. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I'm Peter, and I share the incredible stories of justice and vindication from my grandfather's long life. Today's story shows why you should never underestimate someone just because they've lived longer than you. My name is Harold, though most people call me Harry, and at 78 years old I've learned that respect is something you earn, not something automatically given to elders. This story takes place 2 years ago when I discovered just how little my own family thought of my capabilities, and how satisfying it can be when assumptions crumble in the face of truth. I'd been living in the same house for 43 years, the one my late wife Margaret and I bought when we were newlyweds full of dreams. After she passed 5 years ago, the house felt enormous and empty, but it held too many precious memories for me to consider leaving. My son Thomas and his wife Patricia had been dropping hints for months about assisted living facilities, claiming they were worried about me managing on my own. The real tension started when my grandson, Kevin, moved back home after college. At 24, Kevin was convinced he knew everything about everything, particularly technology. He had a computer science degree and worked for some startup downtown, developing mobile applications. Every family gathering became an exercise in patience as Kevin explained the modern world to me like I was a child seeing electricity for the first time. "Grandpa, you really need to upgrade your phone," Kevin would say, holding up his latest device like it was a sacred artifact. "That old flip phone is from the Stone Age. How do you even function?" I'd smile and explain that my phone made calls and received them, which was all I needed. This response never satisfied Kevin, who seemed personally offended by my contentment with simpler technology. He'd launched into lengthy explanations about apps, social media, and cloud storage, speaking slowly and loudly as if volume could bridge our generational gap. The breaking point came during Thanksgiving dinner. Kevin was showing off some new game he discovered, something called Code Warriors, where players solved programming puzzles to advance through levels. He was completely absorbed, tapping away at his screen while his grandmother's famous stuffing grew cold on his plate. "Kevin," his mother Patricia said gently, "could you put that away during dinner?" "Just one more level, Mom," he replied without looking up. "This game is incredible. The coding challenges are so sophisticated. Whoever designed this really understands programming fundamentals." He glanced up at me with that condescending smile I'd grown to recognize. "You wouldn't understand it, Grandpa. It's all about algorithms and data structures. Pretty advanced stuff." I nodded politely. "I'm sure it is." "I mean, your generation just didn't grow up with this kind of technology," Kevin continued, warming to his favorite topic. "You guys had typewriters and rotary phones. This is a completely different world." Thomas cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Kevin, show some respect." "I'm not being disrespectful," Kevin protested. "I'm just stating facts. Grandpa doesn't understand technology, and that's okay. Not everyone can keep up with progress." The table fell silent except for the soft clinking of silverware. I felt every eye on me, waiting to see how I'd respond to being dismissed so casually by my own grandson. Margaret used to say that dignity was something you wore, not something others could take from you, so I simply nodded and changed the subject to Kevin's work. But that comment stuck with me long after the dishes were cleared. Not everyone can keep up with progress. As if I'd been living in a cave for the past 50 years, completely disconnected from the advancing world around me. The situation escalated. Over the following months, Kevin had apparently decided I was a project that needed managing. He'd arrive unannounced with lists of things I needed to upgrade in my life. A new smartphone, a tablet, a smart TV, even a voice assistant that would help me stay connected. "Grandpa, you're missing out on so much," he'd say, unpacking some new gadget. "Look, this tablet can show you the weather, play music, even let you video chat with family. You don't have to live like it's 1975. I appreciated his concern, even if his delivery left much to be desired, but I genuinely didn't need or want most of these devices. I had a perfectly functional television, a radio that picked up my favorite jazz station, and a landline telephone that connected me to anyone I needed to reach. My life worked fine without constant digital stimulation. Kevin interpreted my contentment as stubbornness. "You're being difficult, Grandpa. Technology is supposed to make life easier, but you have to be willing to learn." During one particularly frustrating visit, Kevin found me reading a physical newspaper at my kitchen table. This seemed to offend him personally. "Why are you reading that?" he asked, gesturing at the paper like it was contaminated. "Everything in there is already old news. You could get real-time updates on your phone." "I enjoy the ritual," I explained. "The feel of the paper, the way information is organized." "It's pleasant," Kevin shook his head sadly. "Grandpa, I worry about you. You're so disconnected from reality. The world is moving forward and you're stuck in the past. He pulled out his phone and showed me the screen. Look, I've got news updates, weather alerts, social media feeds, work emails, games, music, videos, everything I need right here. This is how people live now. The game from Thanksgiving was still prominently displayed on his home screen. Code Warriors had apparently become his primary obsession. He played it during family visits, at restaurants, even during conversations. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I kept that observation to myself. The final straw came when Kevin convinced his parents that I needed intervention. They arrived one Saturday morning with serious expressions and printed materials about senior living communities. "Dad," Thomas began carefully, "we're worried about your quality of life. You're isolated here, resistant to helpful technology, and frankly, we think you'd be happier around people your own age who understand your limitations." Patricia nodded supportively. "These communities have activities, meals prepared for you, and staff who can help with technology and modern conveniences. You wouldn't have to struggle with things that are too complicated." Kevin had his laptop open, showing me virtual tour of various facilities. "Look, Grandpa, they have computer classes for seniors. You could finally learn how to use email and browse the internet. They'll start with the basics and go really slowly." I listened to their presentation in stunned silence. My own family was essentially declaring me incompetent because I preferred simplicity to complexity, tradition to innovation. In their minds, my choice to live without constant digital connectivity meant I was failing to thrive in the modern world. "I appreciate your concern," I said finally, "but I'm perfectly capable of living independently. I pay my bills, maintain my home, cook my meals, and manage my affairs without assistance." "But you could be doing so much more," Kevin insisted. "You're limiting yourself unnecessarily. It's like you've given up on learning and growing." That accusation hit particularly hard because it was so fundamentally wrong. I'd never stopped learning or growing, but my education took different forms than Kevin recognized. I read voraciously, listened to educational programs on the radio, and engaged with ideas constantly. Just because I didn't broadcast my intellectual life on social media didn't mean it didn't exist. Over the next few weeks, the family pressure intensified. Phone calls became pointed discussions about my declining state. Thomas would drop by unannounced to check on me, clearly looking for evidence of incompetence or confusion. Kevin continued his technology interventions, each visit bringing fresh frustration when I politely declined his latest solution to my supposedly impoverished life. The breaking point came when I overheard Kevin talking to his girlfriend Stephanie after Sunday dinner. I'd stepped outside to get some fresh air when their voices carried through the open kitchen window. "I feel so bad for him," Kevin was saying. "He just sits in that big house all day, completely cut off from the world. He doesn't understand how anything works anymore. Sometimes I wonder if he's developing dementia or something." "That's so sad," Stephanie replied. "At least he has you looking out for him." "I'm trying, but he's so stubborn. Yesterday I tried to show him how to use the internet, and he looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. It's like talking to someone from another century." My hands clenched involuntarily. Another century. As if the decades I'd spent working, learning, and building something meaningful had been erased by my failure to embrace every new technological trend. "My mom thinks they should put him in a home," Kevin continued. "She's probably right. He's just not equipped to handle modern life anymore." Standing there in my own backyard, listening to my grandson discuss my supposed inadequacies with casual certainty, something crystallized inside me. I'd spent months tolerating condescension and accepting disrespect in the name of family harmony, but there were limits to what dignity could endure. That night, I made a decision. It was time for Kevin to learn something about assumptions and the danger of underestimating people based on superficial observations. The next morning, I called Kevin and asked if he'd like to come over for lunch. I mentioned that I'd been thinking about his suggestions regarding technology and might be ready to learn a few things. The enthusiasm in his voice was both touching and infuriating. He was genuinely excited to help his backward grandfather enter the modern world. Kevin arrived promptly at noon with his laptop bag and several printed tutorials he'd prepared. "I'm so glad you're finally ready to do this, Grandpa," he said, setting up his equipment on my dining room table. "We'll start slow and work our way up." He opened his laptop and immediately launched Code Warriors. "I know this might seem complicated, but I thought you could watch me play a few levels to get a sense of how modern software works. This game is actually really educational. It teaches programming concepts through puzzles." I watched him navigate through several levels, his fingers dancing across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. The game was indeed sophisticated, with complex logical challenges wrapped in an engaging interface. Kevin provided running commentary about the cleverness of the design, the intuitive user experience, and the educational value of the puzzles. "Whoever created this is a genius," he said, advancing to a particularly difficult level. "The way they've structured the learning curve is perfect. Each challenge builds on the previous one, introducing new concepts without overwhelming the player." He paused to look at me. "Are you following any of this, Grandpa? I know it might seem overwhelming at first." "I'm following it just fine," I replied. "It does seem like very sophisticated design work." Kevin beamed with pride. "Exactly. That's what separates modern software from the simple programs your generation might remember. This takes real expertise in user interface design, educational psychology, and advanced programming techniques." He returned to the game, working through a series of increasingly complex puzzles. I had to admit, watching him play brought back memories of the countless hours I'd spent developing similar challenges, testing different approaches to make complex concepts accessible to users with varying skill levels. "The artificial intelligence in this is incredible too," Kevin continued. "The way it adapts to your skill level and provides hints when you're stuck, that's really advanced machine learning." He was right about that as well. The adaptive algorithms had taken months to perfect, requiring extensive testing and refinement to achieve the seamless user experience he was enjoying. After an hour of demonstration, Kevin closed the laptop and pulled out his printed materials. "Okay, now let's start with the basics. We'll begin with email, then move on to web browsing, and eventually work our way up to more advanced applications." I looked at the tutorials he'd prepared, noting the careful organization and patient tone of the instructions. Despite his condescending attitude, Kevin had put genuine effort into helping me learn what he believed I needed to know. "Kevin," I said quietly, "before we start, I'd like to show you something." I walked to the small desk in the corner of the living room and retrieved a folder I'd been keeping there. Inside were documents I rarely needed to access anymore, but which represented a significant portion of my life's work. "What's that?" Kevin asked, clearly hoping I wasn't about to derail his carefully planned lesson with irrelevant paperwork. I handed him the first document, a letter from a software company dated 6 months earlier. Kevin's eyes scanned the formal language, his expression shifting from polite interest to confusion. "I don't understand," he said slowly. "This is about royalty payments for something called adaptive learning systems and educational software licensing." "Keep reading," I suggested. The next document was a quarterly earnings report showing substantial income from various software licensing agreements. Kevin's confusion deepened as he flipped through pages of financial statements, all bearing my name as the recipient. "Grandpa, what is this? Are you getting money from software companies?" I handed him the third document, a certificate of incorporation for a company called Harrison Educational Software, founded in 1982. My name was listed as founder and primary shareholder. Kevin's hands began to tremble slightly as he processed the information. You owned a software company?" "Own," I corrected gently. "Present tense, though I've been mostly retired from active development for the past 15 years. The fourth document was a patent filing for adaptive user interface systems for educational applications, granted in 1995 and renewed multiple times since. Kevin recognized several of the technical concepts from his own computer science education. "I don't understand," he repeated, though his tone had shifted from confusion to something approaching panic. "You don't know anything about computers." "I've been working with computers since before you were born," I said calmly. "I started programming in 1971 when computers filled entire rooms and required punch cards for input. I've written code in languages you've probably never heard of and developed algorithms that are still used in educational software today." Kevin stared at the patent document, his face pale. But you can't even use a smartphone." "I choose not to use a smartphone because I find them unnecessary for my lifestyle," I replied. "That's different from being unable to use one. I understand exactly how they work. I helped develop some of the user interface principles they're based on." I reached for one final document, the one I'd been saving for this moment. It was a copyright registration from 2018 for Code Warriors, an adaptive programming education platform. Kevin's eyes widened as he read his favorite game's title on the official document. "No," he whispered. "I developed Code Warriors as a retirement project," I explained. "I wanted to create something that would make programming concepts accessible to young adults, using game mechanics to maintain engagement while building real skills." Kevin's laptop was still open on the table, the Code Warriors logo prominently displayed on the screen. He looked back and forth between the copyright document and his computer, his mouth opening and closing without sound. The artificial intelligence you were praising, I continued, took me 8 months to develop. The adaptive difficulty system required testing with over 200 beta users to calibrate properly. The user interface went through 17 iterations before I was satisfied with the learning curve. You created Code Warriors? Kevin's voice was barely audible. I created the original version. A team of younger programmers helped me update it for modern platforms and add some features I couldn't implement alone. But the core educational algorithms, the puzzle design, and the adaptive systems, that's all mine. Kevin sat down heavily in the nearest chair, still clutching the copyright document. I've been playing your game for months. I know. You mentioned it at Thanksgiving dinner, remember? You said whoever designed it really understood programming fundamentals. The irony hung in the air like a physical presence. Kevin had been using my creation to demonstrate his technological superiority over me, praising its sophistication while dismissing my capabilities. But why didn't you tell me? He asked, his voice cracking slightly. When? I asked. When you were explaining how your generation invented technology, when you were telling me I couldn't understand modern software, when you suggested I needed remedial computer classes. Kevin winced at each reminder of his previous condescension. I mean you never mentioned. I never mentioned it because I didn't feel the need to prove my worth to anyone, I said. I'm proud of my work, but I don't require constant validation or recognition. I built these systems to help people learn, not to impress my grandson. All this time, Kevin whispered, you've been listening to me explain things you invented. Not just listening, I corrected. Learning, you had interesting insights about user experience from a player's perspective. Some of your observations were quite valuable. Kevin buried his face in his hands. Oh God, I've been such an ass. You've been young, I said more gently. Young people often mistake experience for obsolescence. It's a natural part of growing up to believe that your generation discovered everything important. But I was so condescending, so arrogant. Yes, you were, but you were also genuinely trying to help, even if your approach was misguided. Your intentions were good, even when your assumptions were wrong. Kevin looked up at me with tears in his eyes. I told everyone you were becoming senile. I said you couldn't handle modern life. I heard you talking to Stephanie, I admitted. That conversation was part of what motivated me to have this discussion today. You heard that? Kevin's face flushed with shame. Grandpa, I'm so sorry. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything right now, I replied. But you might want to think about the difference between choosing simplicity and lacking capability. We sat in silence for several minutes while Kevin processed everything he'd learned. I could see him mentally replaying months of interactions, viewing them through this new lens of understanding. Your parents don't know about the software company, I said eventually. Kevin looked up sharply. They don't. I've never felt the need to discuss my business affairs with the family. It seemed like boasting. But they think. We all thought you were struggling financially. That's part of why they want you to move to assisted living. I'm comfortable financially, I said with deliberate understatement. The software licensing provides more than enough income for my needs. Kevin gestured at the modest furnishings of my living room. But you live so simply. I live the way I prefer to live. Complexity isn't always better than simplicity, and expensive isn't always better than sufficient. Does anyone know about this? Kevin asked, still holding the copyright document. My lawyer knows, obviously. My accountant, a few colleagues from the old days, but I've never seen the need to broadcast my professional accomplishments to people who weren't interested in understanding them. Kevin flinched at the implied criticism. We were interested, we assumed. You assumed that age meant irrelevance, I finished. That's a common mistake, but it's still a mistake. What do I do now? Kevin asked helplessly. How do I fix this? You start by changing your assumptions about people, I suggested. Instead of looking at someone and deciding what they can't do based on their age or appearance, try finding out what they actually know. I feel terrible. Good. Feeling terrible means you're learning something important about respect and humility. Kevin spent the next hour asking questions about my career, my company, and the development of Code Warriors. His attitude had completely transformed, where before he'd spoken to me like a child. Now he addressed me like a respected colleague. I told him about the early days of programming, when we wrote code on paper before transferring it to punch cards, and about watching the industry evolve from room-sized computers to devices that fit in your pocket. I explained how the principles of good software design had remained constant even as the platforms changed dramatically. The game has helped thousands of students learn programming, I mentioned. Universities use it in their introductory courses, and several companies have licensed the algorithms for their own training programs. Kevin shook his head in amazement. I had no idea the impact you've had. Every generation builds on what came before, I said. Your knowledge of modern platforms and current programming trends is valuable. My experience with educational design and user psychology is also valuable. Neither perspective is complete by itself. As the afternoon wore on, Kevin's embarrassment gradually gave way to genuine curiosity about my work. He asked technical questions about algorithm design, user interface psychology, and educational theory. For the first time in months, we had a real conversation between equals. I have an idea, Kevin said suddenly. What if we collaborated on updating Code Warriors? I could handle the modern platform integration, and you could guide the educational aspects. I considered the proposal. That could be interesting, though I'd want to maintain creative control over the core learning systems. Of course, I wouldn't presume to improve on your design, but I could help optimize it for mobile devices, add social features, maybe integrate with virtual reality platforms. Virtual reality for programming education, I mused. That has possibilities. We spent another hour discussing potential enhancements to the game, with Kevin's enthusiasm now channeled into respect rather than condescension. His ideas were actually quite good. He understood modern user expectations in ways that complemented my educational expertise. When Kevin finally prepared to leave, he packed up his tutorial materials without unpacking them. I guess you don't need computer lessons after all, he said sheepishly. Actually, I wouldn't mind learning about some of the newer social media platforms, I said. Not to use them extensively, but to understand how young people communicate and share information. Kevin brightened. Really, I could teach you that, but I promise to approach it differently this time. I'd appreciate that. He paused at the door. Grandpa, what should I tell my parents about the assisted living discussions? Tell them we had a good conversation about technology and that you learned some things about your grandfather you didn't know before. They'll figure out the rest eventually. The following weeks brought significant changes in my relationship with the family. Kevin began visiting regularly, not to help me with technology, but to discuss programming challenges and game design theory. Word gradually spread that I had more technical knowledge than anyone had realized, though the full extent of my professional background remained between Kevin and me. Thomas and Patricia stopped their assisted living campaign, noting that I seemed more engaged and energetic than I'd been in months. They attributed this improvement to Kevin's successful technology lessons, which Kevin and I allowed them to believe. The most satisfying moment came 3 weeks later during Sunday dinner. Kevin was showing off some improvements he'd made to a work project, explaining the technical challenges to the family. That's really impressive problem-solving, I commented, understanding exactly what he'd accomplished. Thanks, Grandpa, Kevin replied, then turned to the others. Grandpa actually has some really insightful perspectives on software design. His understanding of user psychology is incredible. Thomas looked surprised. I didn't realize you knew about programming, Dad. I've picked up a few things over the years, I said modestly, catching Kevin's eye across the table. Kevin grinned and returned to his demonstration, but I noticed him glance at his phone screen where Code Warriors was still installed. Every time he played it now, he was interacting with my work, my ideas, and my understanding of how people learn. The conversation continued around the table, but I found myself reflecting on the broader lessons of the past. Respect isn't something you can demand, but it's something you can earn by demonstrating competence and dignity. Age doesn't diminish the value of experience, it accumulates wisdom that younger generations often don't recognize until they need it. My grandson had learned that assumptions are dangerous, especially when they're based on superficial observations rather than genuine understanding. I'd learned that sometimes people need dramatic revelations to overcome their preconceptions, even when gentler approaches would be preferable. Most importantly, we'd both learned that different generations have valuable perspectives to offer each other, but only when there's mutual respect and genuine curiosity rather than condescending assumptions. Kevin never deleted Code Warriors from his phone, but now when he played it, he understood that the sophisticated educational systems he'd praised were created by the outdated grandfather he'd tried to educate. Every algorithm he encountered, every clever interface decision, every adaptive challenge was a reminder that wisdom and capability don't expire with age. The family dynamics gradually normalized, with Kevin serving as an unexpected bridge between my technical background and everyone else's assumptions. He never revealed the full extent of my professional accomplishments, but he made sure that future conversations included appropriate respect for my knowledge and experience. 6 months later, we did collaborate on updating Code Warriors for virtual reality platforms. The project gave us a chance to blend his understanding of modern technology with my educational design principles. Working together, we created something neither of us could have developed alone, which, I suppose, is how progress really works. The game's success in VR exceeded our expectations, earning recognition from educational technology conferences and generating substantial licensing revenue. Kevin insisted that his name appear. Secondary to mine in the credits, a gesture of respect that meant more to me than any financial success. During the launch party for the VR version, Kevin gave a presentation about the development process. "My grandfather taught me that innovation isn't about replacing what came before," he told the audience. "It's about building on proven foundations with new tools and perspectives." Sitting in the audience, listening to my grandson speak with genuine respect about intergenerational collaboration, I felt a satisfaction that went beyond professional achievement. We'd both learned valuable lessons about assumptions, respect, and the importance of looking deeper than surface impressions. The best part wasn't proving Kevin wrong about my capabilities, it was discovering that once his assumptions changed, he became genuinely interested in learning from my experience. Respect, it turns out, is the foundation of all meaningful relationships, whether between generations, colleagues, or family members. As we continue working together on new projects, Kevin often asks for my perspective on design decisions or user interface challenges. He's learned to value experience as much as innovation, and I've learned to appreciate his insights into modern user expectations and technological possibilities. The moral of this story isn't that older people know everything or that younger people should simply defer to their elders. It's that respect and curiosity create better outcomes than assumptions and condescension, regardless of age or apparent expertise. Everyone has something valuable to offer, but only when we approach each other with genuine interest in learning rather than predetermined ideas about what others can or cannot contribute. My grandson learned this lesson through dramatic revelation, but the principle applies to every interaction between people of different generations, backgrounds, and experiences. Sometimes the most sophisticated solutions come from those who have been quietly building, creating, and innovating long before their capabilities became visible to others. And sometimes the people we think need our help the most are actually the ones who have been helping us all along. That's the story of how my grandson learned not to underestimate people based on appearances, and how I learned that sometimes a little dramatic revelation can be more effective than patient tolerance when it comes to changing deep-seated assumptions. Thank you for listening to another story from Revenge with Peter. Remember to comment below and tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice, vindication, and the wisdom that comes with experience.